It started with silence at the border. Refrigerated containers packed with American cheese, hundreds of them, were stopped cold. Not delayed, not inspected, rejected. And just like that, $3 billion worth of U.S. dairy was turned around, sent back across the Canadian border like expired leftovers from a forgotten fridge. But this wasn't a bureaucratic mistake. This was retaliation. Calculated, ruthless, immediate. And it was only the beginning. In today's episode of Rise of East, we uncover how Canada's 300% dairy tariff just triggered a full-scale collapse in America's dairy industry, and why your next supermarket cheese deal might be a dangerous illusion. The tariff fuse lit. Alberta beef and dairy producers were already on edge after Trump's latest tariff salvos. But what happened next stunned both sides of the border. Within 48 hours, more than 200 containers of U.S. cheese valued at nearly $3 billion were outright rejected by Canada. Ottawa didn't hesitate. The moment the U.S. breached its allowed quota under the USMCA agreement, Canada activated a 300% retaliatory tariff. Every block of cheese, every pound of butter, every gallon of milk instantly became commercial dead weight. Uncompetitive, unsellable, unwelcome. Supermarket shelves abroad had been cleared in anticipation of U.S. exports, but instead, the cheese came flooding back. Domestic retailers were overwhelmed. Cold storage was maxed out, and price tags started to collapse. A trade war had just reached your fridge. What really came back? On the surface, it looked like premium product. But that's not what returned to American ports. The truth? Much of the rejected dairy was aging inventory, some of it near expiration, some already rejected by other foreign buyers. And now it was being offloaded quietly onto U.S. shelves, marked with clearance stickers and flash sale labels. In Wisconsin, dairy farmers began dumping milk by the gallon. Storage tanks were full, buyers had vanished, and the domestic market had no room left to absorb the flood. At Walmart, Target, and Kroger, shoppers were suddenly spoiled for choice. But few realized what they were buying. No warnings, no labels, just deep discounts on a product the rest of the world didn't want. This wasn't commerce. It was liquidation. How we got here? To understand this collapse, we need to rewind. Since the 1960s, Canada has tightly regulated its dairy industry under a system called supply management, production quotas, fixed pricing, tight import controls, everything designed to protect Canadian farmers and ensure high-quality dairy. Under the USMCA, successor to NAFTA, the U.S. was granted limited access to just 3.6% of Canada's dairy, market without penalty. But in July 2025, the U.S. pushed beyond that quota. And Canada didn't blink. Ottawa activated the tariff trigger and simultaneously slashed the remaining TRQ, tariff rate quota, allocations. It wasn't just a response. It was a surgical strike against the U.S. dairy export model. The result? Chaos. Containers were turned away en masse. Products were sent back without warning, and most of them had nowhere to go. The crisis on the ground, on Wisconsin farms, desperation set in. Dairy producers began euthanizing cows. Milk was dumped by the ton. Hundreds of farms, especially small family-run operations, have shuttered since 2020, and the pace is accelerating. According to the International Dairy Foods Association, any U.S. dairy export exceeding Canada's quota faces nearly 300% in tariffs. That turns each shipment into a multi-million-dollar loss on contact. Even U.S. customs agents reported that specialty cheeses, including Italian-style imports and organic dairy, were being turned away with little or no explanation. In the background, a quiet storm brewed. The National Milk Producers Federation, NMPF, issued an emergency alert in mid-2025. The U.S. dairy sector had already racked up $7 billion in losses just from retaliatory tariffs and the resulting supply chain carnage. But it gets worse. The supermarket illusion. Walk into any big box store, and you'll see them eye-catching discount labels on shredded cheddar, mozzarella blocks, fancy brie, and organic butter. But those markdowns? They're not driven by market forces. They're panic pricing, part of a desperate effort to unload aging stock before it expires. No disclosures. No origin transparency. No regulation. Much of the cheese being sold is frozen, rebranded, and rapidly approaching its sell-by date. American consumers have no idea. They're buying inventory that other countries explicitly refused. This isn't a great deal. It's an international dairy dumping operation, and U.S. households are the final stop. And while grocery shoppers unknowingly take home near-expired product, the federal government remains disturbingly silent. No press conferences. No emergency intervention. Not even a statement. The Canadian comparison. Just across the border, Canada's dairy sector paints a very different picture. Milk and cheese production is governed by stringent rules. Growth hormones like RBST are banned outright. Every batch of milk is tested for antibiotic residue before entering processing facilities. Systems like ProAction enforce ethical production, traceability, and environmental standards. Canadian consumers trust their dairy because the system is designed to earn it. In contrast, U.S. dairy is facing growing distrust. There are no laws requiring labeling for hormone content. No transparency rules about rejected exports. No regulations forcing retailers to disclose product origin or condition. And in 2025, that vacuum of accountability has now collided with the force of a global trade war. The global backlash, Canada's move, wasn't just economic self-defense. It was a declaration. If the U.S. violates trade terms, Canada will retaliate swiftly with the full weight of its regulatory system. And other countries took notice. The European Commission recently added $72 billion worth of U.S. exports, including dairy products, to a proposed retaliatory tariff list. Unless Washington addresses dumping concerns, similar trade walls could rise across Europe. Australia, Japan, and even long-standing U.S. allies are now reviewing their dairy import standards. Many are considering bans on hormone-treated milk or rejecting near-expired products entirely. This isn't just a Canada-U.S. feud anymore. It's the potential unraveling of America's entire agricultural export credibility. The cost of silence. In the face of this crisis, one question echoes louder than all others. Where is Washington? Farmers are going bankrupt. Retailers are offloading sketchy product. And American consumers are unknowingly buying back their own trade disaster. And yet the White House has offered only silence. Industry groups have begged for stimulus. States like Wisconsin have floated emergency cheese purchase programs just to absorb the overflow. Cold storage warehouses are bursting. Distribution networks are breaking down. But none of these are real solutions. They're bandages on a bleeding artery. Without systemic reform, financial aid, quota negotiations, transparency laws, the U.S. dairy industry may not survive another 12 months. What the future looks like. So what happens next? Some experts believe we're approaching a permanent collapse in dairy exports. Others warn that consumer trust, once lost, may never fully return. And for average Americans aged 21 to 54, those bargain bin cheese deals may start to feel like betrayal, because what's being sold isn't just discounted product. The wreckage of a failed trade policy, mislabeled, underregulated, and quietly dumped into the domestic market. Meanwhile, foreign buyers are pulling back. International watchdogs are circling. And America's food supply chain, long considered the gold standard of efficiency, is starting to fracture under the weight of its own missteps. Now the question isn't just economic. It's personal. If Canada is banning hormone-treated milk, labeling every shipment, and defending its farmers with bold tariffs, why isn't the U.S. doing the same? Why are American shoppers unknowingly buying returned exports? Why has the White House stayed silent while billions in agricultural losses mount? And most importantly, if U.S. farmers, corporations, and consumers are all suffering from a trade war they didn't ask for, who exactly is this policy supposed to serve? Subscribe to Rise of